ASMA has been a source of great inspiration for all of us, and I'm very happy to see that, and it's great credit to the AGHS team, particularly led by Nida and Salema, that ASMA's mission continues, and it continues to thrive. So I think this is something that a lot of people did not expect. Usually founders of organizations, when they leave the organization in Pakistan, the organizations don't remain functional. And so that shows that it was truly a teamwork, and it continues the good work it does, and it continues to innovate. I began with thanks. I will also offer an apology because I did promise that I will be bringing in a couple of paralegals who have been working in some of the remote parts of Punjab and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and one or two legal aid lawyers, but unfortunately they were not able to travel for various reasons. And but I have been, over the last 10 years, accompanying them to various field visits. I've looked at all the case studies and all the case work that they have done. So I'll be in a position to talk a little bit about the work that we have supported over the years. Now, when it comes to this consultation, it's basically about paralegals and paralegal services. It's also about rule of law, access to justice, legal aid, and I think it's very important in this respect because we are now experiencing a great change. I think Haya Zahid was here, and it was not that long ago, I think in 2010, when their legal aid office was attacked in Karachi by the Karachi Bar Association, because the lawyers were against legal aid. And now it's such a big change because of the work that the organizations have done, that we are talking about legal aid, and we are going a step further. We are talking about paralegals. It took a lot of work. I think quite a few organizations contributed to that, for the organized legal community to realize that paralegals do not compete with lawyers, they complement their work. That legal aid is not only in the interest of the community, collectively it's in the interest of the legal profession. We do, after all, stand for rule of law. So in that context, we have to look at the issue of paralegals. As I said, AGHS is the most appropriate organization to begin this discussion, for the simple reason that they were the first organization to train and deploy paralegals. And this did not happen by accident. Any organization that starts working on legal aid will sooner or later realize that they have to work with whatever they call them, legal aid, assistance, someone who can go to the community and really work in the community on legal issues, pass information, and act as a bridge between the legal aid lawyer and the people, the poorest of the poor, the most marginalized. We don't realize as lawyers how difficult the journey for a marginalized person who has suffered a justiciable wrong is to come to the courts of law. We talk about legal aid. For us, legal aid begins when a person meets a legal aid lawyer. And that's our definition of legal aid. That's our definition of maybe rule of law. But there are a few things, when we look at things in Pakistan's context, we should take this into consideration. I will just give you one example, and this is from Chitral. I'm an eyewitness. I was with a team of SRSP. We had lawyers and paralegals, and we were going in the community, not far away from the city of Chitral, which is a mountainous area. And there we came across a house, and we were just randomly looking. It was not survey, it was just, we were just looking at some of the work that they had done earlier. And so there was something, some of the female paralegals went, and then of course I didn't go there, but one of our female lawyers went there. And there was a very strange case. There was a very young girl, maybe 15 years old, and she was crying her eyes out, her parents besides her, just as worried. And we asked what was the problem. And they belong to the Gujar community, which is a sort of a nomadic people who go around wherever the grass is greener, they will go around there with their cattle. But this particular family had stayed near Chatral because they were sending their daughter to school. And then in one night, her uncle came from nowhere with a group of armed men. And he said that I have decided to marry off my niece to this gentleman. And they showed a photograph. And at gunpoint, a nikah ceremony was performed. And then, of course, the uncle said that it's not a kidnapping. We are not going to take the girl. So now that the nikah has been performed, the marriage, the official marriage, so we will come one day in the morning and take the bride away. The girl wanted to continue education. They didn't want to, the parents didn't want her to get married. But there was a problem. And so it looked very strange that right next to a city, there is this happening and no one has come forward to help. So we went to the police, and the police said, yes, the guy was here, but he left. Then we went to all the lawyers, and the lawyers said, yes, they was here. And we asked him to file the case, but he disappears whenever we talk about a case. And so this had been going on for a few weeks already. The girl waiting for her kidnappers to come back. And that's when really the paralegals came in, and they understood the customs of the area. They said that it's not a good idea to shift them because then there will be an honor killing if they marry her again. And so that was a big problem. So they sat down with the parents of the girl, and so they came to the crux of the problem. The reason that the father was not going to the police, the reason that the father was not going to the courts, was that his family were out there in the open, living in practically a pasture. And the moment her uncle found out that either a case has been lodged or a case has been filed, they would come and take the girl away. And so this is something that no lawyer could understand. And so then obviously the community elders got involved, and finally the family was moved to a safer place under the protection of someone who was one of the more powerful families in the area. And it was then that the father mustered the courage to both lodge an FIR and file a case for the annulment of the marriage. The police case went nowhere for other reasons, but the other case was decided in that favor. So when we look at legal aid or access to justice, we are looking not just from the point where the person meets the lawyer. The journey to the court is also a very long journey, and that's also very difficult for a very large number of people. And lawyers have certain privileges, they have certain advantages, but they have one distinct disadvantage. They cannot go from house to house. Legal ethics do not permit that. So legal aid, particularly if you want to serve the most underprivileged communities who have the most strangest of problems, will need some form of a system to provide whatever name they go by, but it has to be there. And that is where the problem starts. And I'll raise one issue before I go deeper into that. At the moment, the paralegals have no official recognition in Pakistan. That makes them vulnerable. There is no client-attorney privilege. So if, God forbid, they get involved or they hear about a criminal case or someone confesses to them or they come to know of something, they can become witnesses. The police can also make them accomplices. And so that's why we've been very careful in asking our paralegals not to touch anything that is vaguely criminal. There are also other issues of training. because paralegals are not lawyers. So what do you train them on? You obviously, it has to be a pressing problem. So there has to be, the government does not conduct at any scale legal needs assessment. So they don't know whether the little surveys that our partner organizations did, and we came across some very, very unexpected results. A lot of people think that when you talk of a legal problem that the topmost would be criminal. It isn't. In our legal needs assessments, it was consumer laws. And people even didn't know that these problems were legal problems, and they had a legal remedy. Which brings us to another point that people usually do not know about quite a few of the rights that they have. And the other point is also, it's not just about going to court. There are two other functions that are essential to the work that paralegals do. First is, of course, the legal work that they do. They complement the work of the legal aid organizations. The second is access to services. That is just as important, and it has as much of legal consequences as a legal case. If you do not have an ID card, you cannot vote. If you have no vote, no one will listen to you. You cannot have a passport, you cannot travel. Police can take you into custody anywhere. So, and since it is intrinsically connected to your right to vote, so it's not in everyone's interest, particularly in the rural areas, that you do get an ID card. So there's a huge politics behind ID cards. That can only be controlled or done away with through paralegals, their birth certificates, access to other sorts of information. The other large issue that I want to raise is that which it does not relate to legal aid systems. It's a general problem. I think that vast majority of both civil and criminal cases do not reach the courts of law. I think the vast majority of cases in the country are decided informally. They are decided, even serious criminal cases, by ADR mechanisms of various sorts called in our parts jirgas, in other parts panchayat, or whatever name they go by. They have 2 or 3 or 4 characteristics which are basically, we were talking about rule of law, which are basically against the concept of rule of law. The first is that these organizations, these jirgas do not follow the national law. And they have no knowledge of national law. They decide cases under the regressive customary law. And sometimes if a customary law rule does not exist and they have to favor someone, they can just invent one. And because it's not codified, there is no appeal, you cannot do anything. So basically, the powerful or the more prosperous or the more politically connected can get away with anything before a jirga. Secondly, and I must confess I have done that, when someone comes to me and he or she has a piece of evidence which is not admissible in a court of law, I advise them to go to a jirga, because the rules of evidence do not apply there. And a lot of people don't know that this piece of paper is worth nothing, but a jirga thinks differently. Then there are, of course, cases that are decided under some very regressive interpretations of religious law. The other main issue is that the jirgas jump from one law to the other. I mean, like when it comes to a case of theft, they might decide it under Sharia law. But when it comes to the women's right to inheritance, then they will forget about Sharia and decide the case under the customary law. So obviously there are several tricks up their sleeves, and usually it happens that they basically give decisions that are against the core concepts of the rule of law. Jirgas, like any lay person, if you ask them to decide a case, they often apply the rule of proportionality. So, and that can create quite a lot of problems. Uh, if a person slaps someone and then the other person kills him, under the court, under the legal system, the slap becomes a motive and and a proof that the murder was conducted. But before a jirga, they will say that, okay, oh, when you give a slap to a person in the middle of a crowded market, you have killed him. So practically, that's a forgivable, justifiable homicide. So it creates quite a lot of problems. And most of these are against the law. The Constitution has expressly declared that any decision given or any custom that is against the laws of Pakistan is void. And one of the things, and I'll come to this, back to this, is that even if paralegals do nothing, but they are connected to a legal aid clinic, it has a very sobering effect on the jirgas or the panchayats operating in that area, because there is always a threat that one of the paralegals will turn up somewhere before a court, and this might be taken before the court of law. Now, coming to the issue of paralegals, and I must say that when we talk about legislation or when we talk about legal aid organizations, obviously the first thing would be that they would require some form of paralegal services. But equally important are the university, and they were, I think, mentioned, the university clinics. We have supported clinics, and again, the clinics have been a huge success. Pakistan Bar Council has made some provision for it, though it's inadequate, but in the new syllabus there is a provision for the universities to have legal aid clinics. Unfortunately, our legal system presently is such that students cannot participate in litigation clinics. We don't have continuous trials, we have piecemeal trials which go on for a year or 2 years, and so unless it's just a bail application, the student will not see a case being filed and then being decided, or a major portion of it. So the litigation clinics have not been very successful. What has been successful is, and I'm sorry if I'm very long-winded, you can just tell me and I'll wind it up. What has been very successful has been the street law model, where students, as part of the learning, go and to one of the marginalized communities and talk about a particular topic. It has two advantages. Some information is given to that community, but the real advantage is that the lawyers get a dose of reality. One of our clinics was in Hamdard Law School in Karachi, and they trained the students in criminal procedure, and then they took them to the juvenile ward of the Karachi Central Prison to tell the 12 and 13-year-old detainees what the law said. And what the children told them was really very interesting. And I might be biased, but once you become a lawyer, you don't look at law as, you're worried more about, and I've practiced for 20 years, you're more worried about having the case decided in your case. You look at law as a game, how to go around certain things. You don't look, it's one lawyer versus the other person. But when you go into an environment where you meet these people, you begin to look at law quite differently. And I've seen that change in the students. And most of the students who left the clinics, and they didn't run for very long, most of them were then looking for organizations where they could provide legal aid services because they had seen the children. There have been legal aid clinics going to refugee camps, some to earthquake areas to help out, and that is something that has a very profound effect on law students. So, so when the legislation comes and maybe when we are talking to them, I think it's very essential that a legal aid legislation should accord some protection and some recognition to paralegals. And also there should be room for university clinics, because that's where the future human rights lawyers will come from. I'll just talk just a little bit about how the paralegal programs were set up under the programs that we were supporting. We did not provide uh, any payment to the paralegals. The communities themselves were asked that who do you trust should be the paralegal. So they already had the confidence of the people. Um, and then, of course, you have to conduct a survey to find out what are the pressing problems, because the paralegals cannot be trained on each and everything. It's very difficult to train a lawyer on each and every law. It's more difficult to train a paralegal. And then there has to be a code of conduct that what they can do and what they cannot do. And there things can go wrong. So that's why they need continuous monitoring, which AGHS does. But the main problem arises there. What advice is given, that people have correct information, and mostly that they should act as a bridge so that the access to the lawyer is provided by the paralegal. The other important thing that a paralegal does, and I think that's just as important but it's overlooked in countries like Pakistan, is that nearly 50% of the cases need not come to court. I'm not talking about criminal cases, I'm talking about civil cases. No one can afford the lawyer's fee. If someone borrows 10,000 rupees from me, I will settle by 2 or 3,000 and I will let him keep the 7,000, because if I have to sue him, the lawyer will ask for 15 or 20,000. So you see these kind of petty disputes which might not mean a lot to rich people, but when you go into the rural communities, this is something that matters to people most. And so the mechanisms where these kind of civil disputes, the petty disputes, which look petty to us, but if someone earns 250 rupees a day and then they buy an electric bulb for 200 rupees and it lasts for just 10 minutes, that is a large amount of money. And so there might have been a system earlier, I don't know, but presently there is no system, and a rich shopkeeper, a rich businessman can get away with practically everything. And it is this that paralegals are good at sort of settling, because they have the law behind them, and there is always the threat of making an example of someone, even taking a petty case before the court. There are other problems that came up during our work, and one was of the care for the elderly. In another place we went, and we came to an amazing problem. An old woman had a little piece of land, and she gifted it to her nephew, and the gift was complete, possession was given, in hope that he will take care of her. As soon as he got the land, he threw her out of the house. And so that's a problem courts cannot solve. That is a problem only the paralegals can solve. And so they had to shame the person into it, get the community involved into it. We don't have adequate laws in quite a lot of these areas. And generally, those of us sitting, waiting for people to come to us, to tell us about what the problems are, we'll never know what the problems are unless we deploy paralegals. I can go on and on, but the main point that I wanted to make was that when we talk of paralegals, we should agree amongst ourselves that what exactly do we mean by paralegals? What role do we assign to them? There is a fundamental difference, because being a lawyer is just not a matter of education. It's also a matter of responsibilities, a matter of certain privileges that are given to you, and then a matter of certain restrictions that are placed on you. Just like a doctor, if he sits in an ambulance, does not become a paramedic. A lawyer who goes from house to house does not become a paralegal. he will just become a bad lawyer. so, so there is the need not just to look at paralegals, but also if we want to fundamentally, because if we are bringing at such a big level legal aid into our system, I still don't think it's practical. We don't have the money, but the drafts that I've seen in Peshawar and in other areas, it would require quite a lot of money. And that will fundamentally change the way the legal profession operates if it comes into operation, if the rules are framed, if the funds are given. And this is, before this, we need to get our act together, and we have to carve out a legal definition for paralegals, defining what they can do. And also we need to give some kind of recognition to legal aid clinics. Because in our experience, particularly in Karachi, I wish Haya was here. I think when we went there, 30 or 40% of the persons who were detained couldn't get a bail because there was no lawyer. Someone just had to stand there for the judge to give bail, and there was no one. And occasionally the district judges do go and they hold a camp inside the prison and they do it, but that's not the answer. The answer is that everyone is entitled to a lawyer. A lot of students, a lot of young lawyers are willing to do that, but our systems are such that we have placed restrictions that cannot be done. And with that, I will end my brief, or rather not so brief talk. and I seriously hope that we will begin a discussion not only on the role of paralegals, but also on the role of legal aid lawyers, legislation, so that legislation and how we can, and that's very important for me. Everyone's against jirgas, but we need a law to reform the panchayat or the jirga and bring it within the rule of law framework. If we don't do that, 90% of the people, no matter how many legal aid cases we do, people will remain outside the rule of law. So it's complicated, and I think we are very fortunate that we have organizations like AGHS who are up to the task, and I think the legal profession needs to get more involved in this. But the opportunity is ripe. The government is considering a lot of legislation. There is interest in the lawyer. We have crossed the hurdle of lawyers being against legal aid. We have crossed the hurdle of lawyers not wanting paralegals or confusing them with munshis or thinking they will take their clients away. And there I will end my brief talk and thanks you very much for the patience, because I knew I was standing between you and liberty.